The single mom waitress was assigned to the worst tables. The Mafia Boss sat at every one. It was 5 in the morning in Lakefield, Illinois, a time when the city was supposed to be quiet, but the Quincy Harbor Diner was already buzzing with the wrong kind of energy. A cold drizzle, more sleet than rain, pasted itself to the plate glass windows, blurring the neon sign that flickered open in tired pink letters. Mara Kincaid, 27 years old and feeling every minute of it, tied the strings of her frayed gray uniform apron. The fabric was thin, washed too many times, smelling faintly of stale coffee and fryer oil. She'd just clocked in, and her manager, Brett Malloy, was already pointing. His finger aimed toward the corner by the swinging kitchen doors, right next to the drafty main entrance, table 12, the dead zone. "You're in the gulch," Kincaid, Brett said, his voice greasy. "Keep it clean." Mara nodded, her throat tight. She didn't argue. She couldn't afford to. Arguing meant losing hours, and her last paycheck was already short, again. She swallowed the silence, just as she swallowed the mounting pile of papers on her cramped kitchen counter at home. There was the lawsuit for child support against an ex-husband who had vanished into the ether, and the stack of medical bills from the pediatric pulmonologist. Her son, Theo, 6 years old, had asthma that clung to his small lungs like the damp Lakefield fog. She grabbed a pot of coffee, the glass hot against her palm. The diner was filling up with the early shift construction crews, and this morning, a booth of 3 men in suits that were too sharp for this hour. They were loud, flashing platinum cards as they ordered, their laughter bouncing off the tiled walls. Real estate developers, Mara guessed, carving up another neighborhood. One of them watched her walk by, his eyes raking over her uniform. He made a crude comment to his friends, loud enough for her to hear. Mara's spine stiffened, but she kept walking. From behind the register, Brett caught her eye. He made a small, grotesque motion with his fingers, pinching the corners of his own mouth into a smile. A clear directive. Swallow that 2. Endure it if you want the shift. The bell above the main door chimed, a small, polite sound lost in the diner's clatter. The draft from the door hit Mara's ankles, cold and sharp. A man stepped inside, shaking the rain from a heavy, dark coat. He was alone. He wore an ash-gray suit, impeccably tailored, a stark contrast to the diner's worn linoleum. He didn't look for a clean booth or a warm spot by the counter. His eyes, dark and unsmiling, scanned the room once, bypassed the empty, comfortable spots, and settled on table 12. He walked directly to the dead zone and slid into the vinyl booth, the one with the cracked seat and the wobble. He was placing a folded newspaper on the table when Mara approached, coffee pot in hand. "Sir, that table has a terrible draft," she said, her voice quiet. "Professional. I can seat you at the counter. It's warmer." He looked up. His gaze was steady, not invasive like the men in the booth, but deeply observant. It held no warmth, but it held a strange, heavy stillness. "I'll be fine here," he said, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to the empty mug. "Coffee, black, please." Mara poured. She moved on, taking orders, refilling ketchup bottles, trying to ignore the broker's table, which was getting louder. One of them, the loudest, flagged her down for the check. As she handed it to him, he pulled a few dollars from his wallet, crumpled them, and then, with a smirk, flicked a plastic tip dish directly at her apron. It clattered against the fabric and fell to the floor, coins scattering. The diner noise seemed to dip for a second. Mara froze, her face burning. Before she could bend down, a shadow fell over the table. The man from table 12 was standing there, Franco Sforza. Oh, he didn't look at the broker. He bent smoothly, retrieved the plastic dish, and picked up every coin. He placed the dish back on the broker's table. Then, from his inside pocket, he withdrew a thick fold of cash and placed it firmly on top of the dish. It wasn't a showy gesture, but it was absolute. "Tips don't come with humiliation in this establishment." Franco's voice was soft, barely above the diner's hum, yet it cut through the air like cold steel. The broker's face turned a dull red. He looked from the money to Franco's unblinking stare and suddenly found his receipt very interesting. Franco turned, gave Mara a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and returned to his table. Mara's pocket vibrated. She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling slightly. A text from Theo's daycare. "Theo is wheezing, cough is bad, needs his nebulizer." Panic, cold and familiar, seized her chest. She looked at the clock. It was only 6:30. She looked at Brett, who was watching the exchange with the broker, his face sour. "Brett, I have to go," Mara said, moving toward the register. "My son is sick." Brett scoffed, crossing his arms. "You walk off this shift. Kincaid, you don't come back. We're swamped." "He can't breathe. Brett." "Not my problem. You leave. You're fired." Mara's breath hitched. Fired, no paycheck, no insurance. Theo's inhalers. The world tilted, pressing in on her. She was trapped. "Excuse me, waitress." The low voice came from table 12. Franco Sforza was signaling her. He hadn't seemed to be listening, but he was looking directly at her now. "I'm ready to order," he said, his eyes holding hers. She walked over, her mind racing. "Yeah, monsieur." He didn't look at the menu. "I'll have the Grand Slam breakfast, the lumberjack special, the steak and eggs, medium rare, and a side of the blueberry pancakes, and bring new coffees for the entire room. Start a tab for the worst table." He paused. "And Mr. Malloy," he said, raising his voice just enough for the manager to hear. "Those gentlemen in the booth are disturbing the atmosphere. Please move them to a different section, away from this one." It wasn't a request. Brett's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at the quiet man in the expensive suit, then at the fuming brokers, and made a quick, spineless calculation. He scurried over to the broker's table. Franco Sforza sat back, sipping his water. He held the entire diner in a pocket of absolute silence, an anchor in her storm. He just sat there, eating slowly, reading his paper, occupying the worst piece of real estate in the building as if he owned it. When his sedan, a gleaming black Duisher, finally pulled up outside, Franco left enough cash on the table to cover his feast and half the diner's payroll. He walked out into the rain. Mara watched through the window as his bodyguard, a mountain of a man named Noah Red, held the door. Franco paused, turning to Noah. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the intent. "From now on," Franco said, his voice flat against the rain, "her section is Armitage Consortium territory." He turned back toward the diner. For a second, his eyes met Mara's through the glass. He didn't smile. He just looked, then he reached into his pocket and walked back, pushing the door open just enough to place something on the hostess stand. It was a business card, thick, cream-colored stock. It had no name, no title, and no phone number, just a single line of embossed, dark gray text. "When they push you into a corner, I'll be sitting in it." The next day, Brett's retribution was swift and petty. Mara saw her name on the schedule, shifted to the graveyard slot, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and her section, table 7. The large party booth crammed against the kitchen's blistering hot line. It was the loudest, sweatiest, most chaotic spot in the diner, a place servers fought to avoid. She clocked in under the buzzing fluorescent lights, the smell of overnight bleach sharp in her nose. The diner was a different animal at night. It was quieter, sadder, populated by third shifters and drunks. She tied her apron, her shoulders already aching. The bell chimed at 10:30. Franco Sforza walked in. He didn't wear the heavy coat this time, just the immaculate gray suit. He didn't glance at the empty, clean booths. He walked straight to table 7, slid into the sticky vinyl, and placed his folded newspaper on the table, directly in the path of the swinging kitchen door. He sat, utterly unbothered by the clatter of pans and the shouts from the cooks, and began to read. Mara approached, her coffee pot feeling heavier than usual. "Sir, this isn't the best table." He looked up, his eyes catching the harsh overhead light. "It's your table, isn't it?" She just nodded. "Then it's the best table. Coffee, black." An hour later, 2 men slouched in. They weren't third shifters. They wore thin leather jackets despite the cold, their eyes darting around the diner with a restless, feral energy. They took the counter, ordered 2 coffees, and watched Mara. As she moved between the kitchen and her section, one of them lifted his phone, angling it toward her. The small red light of a recording blinked. Mara felt her skin crawl. She turned her back, focusing on cleaning the coffee machine. At table 7, Franco Sforza didn't look up from his paper. He simply made a small, almost invisible motion with his head, a slight tilt toward the counter. His bodyguard, Noah, who'd been sitting in a booth by the door, stood up. Noah Red was a large man, but he moved with a terrifying silence. He didn't confront the men. He just stood behind them, waiting. The 2 men felt his presence, a shadow falling over their coffee cups. One of them looked over his shoulder, up at Noah's impassive face, and his bravado evaporated. He nudged his friend. They threw a few dollars on the counter and were gone, the bell chiming their hurried exit. Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A strange thing began to happen over the next week. Brett, furious that his punishment had been neutralized, kept Mara on the worst shifts, the graveyard, the double back, the split shift, and every single time. Franco Sforza was there, sitting at the table she was assigned, whether it was the drafty one, the hot one, or the one with the broken leg. And because he was there, others followed. Quiet men in dark suits, lawyers, businessmen, people who spoke in low tones and never stayed long. They all requested Mr. Sforza's section. They tipped in cash, 20s and 50s, folded neatly under their coffee cups. Mara's tips multiplied 5-fold. The more money she made, the more vitriolic Brett's glares became. One rainy afternoon, during a miserable lunch rush, a woman sat at the counter. She had a sharp, intelligent face and a no-nonsense beige trench coat. She ordered a BLT and a coffee and watched. She watched Mara handle a table of rowdy college kids. She watched Brett snap at her for being too slow. When Mara brought the check, the woman slid a $5 bill across the counter, along with a small, stiff business card. Federal Integrity Bureau. The card read, June Atwell, Special Agent. If you ever need to talk about anything, Agent Atwell said, her voice low and clear, about wages or overtime or anything else that feels wrong, you call me. Mara stared at the card. FIB, Federal. It felt heavy, dangerous. She slipped it into her apron pocket, her fingers trembling. Later that same shift, a drunk trucker, reeking of stale beer and frustration, grabbed Mara's arm as she cleared his plate. Hey, sweetheart, what's the hurry? Sit down. Mara tried to pull away. Sir, please let go of me. His grip tightened, his thumb digging into her wrist. Come on, just one drink. The sound was small, but sharp, a metallic snap. The trucker's head whipped around. Franco Sforza was sitting at the next table, table 12 again. He was holding a stainless steel diner spoon in one hand, or rather, he was holding 2 halves of it. He had slowly, methodically, bent the thick metal back and forth until it snapped. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just placed the 2 broken pieces of the spoon on his napkin. His eyes, cold and dark, met the trucker's. The trucker released Mara's arm as if it were on fire. He threw money on the table and stumbled out of the diner. Mara stood, rubbing her wrist, her heart hammering against her ribs. He had broken solid steel with his bare hands. The rain was relentless that night, turning the streets of Lakefield into dark mirrors. She was carrying a heavy bus tray, piled high with dishes, her sneakers slipping on the greasy kitchen floor. She felt the weight shift, the tray tilting, the glasses starting to slide. A hand shot out, not grabbing, but supporting. Franco was there, his own suit jacket getting splashed with dirty water from the tray. His hand was under the plastic, steadying it, his other hand briefly, lightly, closed over her wrist to help her balance. It wasn't a grab, it was a support, but his skin was warm against hers, and the contact sent a jolt, a pure, unexpected current of electricity, straight up her ulna bone. It arced through her, a small touch that made her heart slam against her chest, loud and heavy. "I have it," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I know," he said, and let her go. The next day, she got a text message. It was from Riverside Elementary, Theo's public school. It was a notification from the school nurse. "Dear Miss Kincaid, the donation request for a new portable nebulizer for Theodore has been fulfilled by a private grant from the Community Health Fund. It is here waiting for you." Mara frowned. She hadn't applied for a grant. She'd been trying to save for one. She texted the nurse back. "Who sponsored it?" The reply came a minute later. It was an anonymous donation. "Honey, the check was just signed F.S." That night, as she walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to her tenement building, she saw it. The black Duisher sedan. It was parked across the street, in the shadows of a closed bodega. She stopped, her keys in her hand. He didn't get out. The back window was down, and through the rain, she could see the faint glow of a small reading light. Franco Sforza was in the back seat, reading a book, a sentinel in the dark. He was just watching, guarding. Mara hurried inside, locked her 3 deadbolts, and leaned against the door. She checked on Theo. He was asleep, his small chest rising and falling evenly, the old, rattling nebulizer quiet on his nightstand. He stirred as she kissed his forehead. "Mommy," he mumbled, his eyes half open. "I'm here, baby. Go back to sleep." Was the gray suit man there? Mara froze. "What man? Theo?" "The man from the window. Sometimes he's there. Is he a superhero?" "Mommy." Mara looked out her own cracked window, down at the dark, gleaming car across the street. A superhero. She let out a tired, short laugh that was almost a sob. "No, baby. He's not a superhero." She stroked his hair. "He's a storm that knows how to stand still." In Lakefield. Whispers were currency, and the name Franco Sforza had become the most valuable. The rumors painted a dual picture of his operation, the Armitage Consortium. Publicly, Armitage was the city's quiet benefactor, a network of urban renewal. They built scholarship funds for Riverside Elementary. They repaired the cracked pavement of the local basketball courts. They funded the Lakefield Renewal Center. Privately, anyone who knew the docks or the alleys knew the truth. The Armitage Consortium was the only reason the city hadn't torn itself apart. When turf wars over the shipping lanes threatened to spill onto the streets, it was Armitage that mediated. They settled shootouts not with police reports, but with quiet, off-the-books agreements that left everyone breathing, if not happy. Franco had inherited this empire 3 years ago, after his older brother, Nico, was killed in a boating accident that smelled of engine grease and betrayal. Nico had lived by the Red Ledger, the book of blood, drugs, and fear. The first thing Franco did as boss was close it. He moved all operations to the Blue Ledger, legitimate logistics, port services, and real estate. He was reshaping the family business into something that could withstand the light. This earned him a nickname from the old guard, spat like an insult, the polite boss. The Helix crew, however, felt no politeness. They were old school, thriving on the chaos Nico had managed. Franco's new, legitimate infrastructure was choking their primary gold mine, the port. His clean shipping manifests and union-backed dock workers left no room for their contraband. They hated his honor, his quiet, his refusal to play the old game, and they hated that his silent presence in a run-down diner was costing them influence. Special Agent June Atwell of the Federal Integrity Bureau didn't believe in polite bosses. She believed in patterns. She sat in her unmarked sedan 2 blocks from the Quincy Harbor Diner, nursing a cold coffee. She had managed to plan an informant, a dishwasher with gambling debts, inside Brett's kitchen. The intel was interesting, not about the diner itself, but about its new permanent fixture. June studied the diner's blueprints, cross-referencing them with the security camera feeds she'd managed to pull. Franco Sforza, a man who could buy any restaurant in the city, was spending his nights in a low-end diner, and he always, without fail, sat in the worst possible seat. Table 12 a blind spot for the front camera. Table 7 obscured by the heat glare from the kitchen line. Table 9 perfectly hidden from the street by a structural pillar. June tapped her pen on the dashboard. He wasn't there for the coffee. He was using the diner's blind spots as a mobile, public, and therefore brilliant, safe zone for his meetings. And the waitress, Mara Kincaid, was his cover. Mara, meanwhile, was conducting her own investigation. She felt the shift in the diner's atmosphere. The quiet men who now occupied her section left generous tips, but their eyes were watchful. She was a prop in a play she hadn't auditioned for. She started collecting things. She smoothed out the wrinkled guest checks, noting the times. She pocketed her official shift schedules, comparing them to the hours Brett actually paid her for, highlighting the discrepancies. Then, she got brave. After her shift, she asked Brett to review the security footage from the previous night, claiming she'd lost an earring. While he impatiently fast-forwarded, she saw it. 4:13. Brett, standing by the back door, taking a thick manila envelope from a man whose face was shadowed by a ball cap. A man with a distinct limping gait. Mara had seen him before, lurking near the diner. She later learned his name from one of the line cooks, Sable Knox, a known Helix crew enforcer. Mara saved the clip to her phone. She was holding evidence. She just didn't know what it was evidence of. Miles away, in the clean, sterile halls of the Lakefield Renewal Center, Franco Sforza stood in the pediatric wing. He was ostensibly there to review the budget for the new air filtration system his consortium had funded. He stopped in front of a small, empty room, its walls painted with cartoon whales. In the corner sat a new, state-of-the-art portable nebulizer, identical to the one his donation had provided for Theo. He stared at it for a long time, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped behind his back. He remembered the sound of a child's wheezing cough, a sound that cut deeper than any bullet. The rumors, fueled by Franco's nightly appearances and the sudden influx of high-tipping clientele, caught fire, the single mom and the mafia boss. It became Lakefield's grubby little soap opera. The diner changed. The regulars were pushed out by gawkers. College kids and bored neighborhood gossips flocked in, phones held high, hoping to snap a picture of the mythical, polite boss and his waitress. The air crackled with whispers and the click of smartphone cameras. Franco remained unmoved. He still took the worst table. When the flashbulbs got too aggressive, he would simply adjust his position. When Mara leaned in to take his order, he would lean forward slightly, his broad shoulders in the gray suit creating a physical shield, blocking her tired face from their lenses. He never acknowledged the cameras. He just drank his coffee and made her invisible to them. One night, after a brutal shift, Mara was wiping down the counter when Agent June Atwell slid onto a stool. It was almost midnight. "Long night," June said, signaling for coffee. Mara just nodded, her hands raw from bleach water. "I looked into those wage complaints you filed last year. Mara, the ones your manager ignored." June's voice was casual, friendly. "You've got a real case. Unpaid overtime, illegal shift changes. It's a solid lawsuit." Mara stopped wiping. She looked at the federal agent. This wasn't a friendly chat. "A case like that gets messy," June continued, stirring her coffee. "It opens up the diner's books, an audit. We'd find all sorts of things, I'm sure, especially about where Brett Malloy gets his extra cash." Mara understood. June wasn't offering legal aid. She was offering a trade. Testify about the wages, be the key, and the FIB would rip the diner apart, catching Brett, Helix, and maybe even Franco in the fallout. "I just want what I'm owed," Mara said carefully, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to be bait." June smiled, a thin, professional gesture. Sometimes the bait is the only one who gets to safety. Think about it. She slid her card across the counter again. Mara stared at the card long after June left, the diner empty and silent around her. Outside, across the street, Franco Sforza leaned against a wet brick wall hidden in the alley's shadows. He'd seen the FIB agent enter. He'd watched the entire conversation through the rain-streaked glass. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw Mara's shoulders slump, saw the exhaustion and the fear settle onto her like a shroud. Then, one of the late-night cooks told a bad joke, and Mara let out a short, tired laugh. The sound, faint as it was, carried across the street. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated weariness, a laugh that had given up. Franco pushed himself off the wall. He gripped the collar of his raincoat, the expensive fabric bunching in his fist. He had come to the diner to maintain control of a situation, to protect an asset, but hearing that broken laugh, he felt a cold, unfamiliar ache spread through his chest. It was the first time in a very long time that Franco Sforza realized he wanted something more than just control. The storm broke on a Tuesday night, slamming Lakefield with a force that rattled the diner's old windows. At 8 p.m., the lights buzzed, flickered, and died, plunging the Quincy Harbor Diner into near darkness. Only the red emergency exit signs and the battery-powered backup lights cast a dim, unsettling glow. The diner was half full, and in the back booth, a table of 4 men who had walked in just before the outage began to laugh. Their voices, loud and abrasive, Sable Knox and 3 of his Helix crew associates. Brett Malloy, looking pale in the emergency light, hurried over to Mara. Kincaid, table 4. They're VIPs. Take their order. Mara looked at the booth. Sable was watching her, a predatory grin on his face. Brett, that's not my section tonight, and they're VIPs, Brett hissed, his voice low and panicked. You've been serving Sforza all month. You know how to handle this type. Go. Or clock out. Her breath caught. Clocking out meant walking home in this storm, unpaid. She picked up her notepad, her knuckles white. As she took the first step toward them, the front doorbell chimed. Franco Sforza entered, shaking the deluge from his coat. He didn't wait to be seated. His eyes scanned the dark room, saw Mara's frozen posture, and landed on the Helix booth. He walked straight to table 4, and he didn't address Sable. He simply pulled out one of the empty chairs at the end of their booth, reversed it, and sat down. Straddling it, his arms resting on the back, he placed his folded newspaper on their table. He looked at Mara, his gaze steady as a foundation. I believe you are about to take our order, he said. Sable's grin vanished. The air at the table turned to ice. Franco sat through the entire power outage, a silent, immovable object in his gray suit, a human bulwark. He ordered nothing but coffee and drank it slowly, making the Helix crew sit in simmering, impotent silence for 2 full hours until the lights flickered back on. By the time Mara's shift ended, the rain was a torrential downpour, a solid sheet of water pounding the pavement. She stood under the diner's failing awning, pulling her thin jacket tight, bracing for the cold walk to the bus stop. The black Duescher sedan slid to the curb, its engine a low hum. Noah Red got out, opened a large black umbrella, and walked over to her. He didn't speak. He just held the umbrella over her head. Franco stepped out of the car, stopping a respectful few feet away. The buses will be running late. Miss Kincaid, it's not safe. Please, let us drive you home. He asked. He didn't command. He waited for her answer, his face shadowed by the umbrella Noah now held for him. She looked at the driving rain, then at his waiting expression. She nodded. The inside of the car was silent, warm, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and the clean, crisp scent of his suit. The rain hammered on the roof, but inside, it was a sealed, quiet world. They drove without speaking for several blocks, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the wipers. He's 6, Mara said suddenly, her voice quiet. Franco turned his head from the window. Theo. Yes. His asthma. It gets worse in the damp. When the rain is like this, I worry the moisture will get into the apartment, into his lungs. She stared at her hands, twisting in her lap. He had an attack last winter. He turned blue. I've never been that scared. Franco was quiet for a long moment. He looked forward. at the rain-slicked street. "When I was 19, he said, his voice a low rumble. "I was on the docks when a fuel container went up. The explosion. He didn't elaborate on the violence, just the fact. He unbuttoned the cuff of his white shirt and pushed the sleeve back slightly, revealing a latticework of pale scars on his forearm. Then he gestured vaguely to his chest. The shrapnel from the fuel canister. It collapsed my left lung." He wasn't boasting. He was sharing a fact, a piece of his own history, in the same quiet, vulnerable tone she had used. "I remember the first breath after," he said, "and I remember the feeling of not being able to get one before. I understand." When they reached her building, Noah pulled the car to the curb. Mara reached for the handle. "Wait," Franco said. He got out first, took the large umbrella, and walked around to open her door. He held it over her, shielding her completely as they walked the few feet to her tenement steps. They stood under the leaking portico, the umbrella dripping onto the concrete. The car's headlights cut a warm cone of light through the downpour. "Thank you, Franco," she said, using his name for the first time. "You're welcome, Mara." He didn't move to leave. He just looked at her, his eyes dark and serious in the dim light. He took a small step closer, not touching, just entering her space. He was so tall, a solid presence against the storm. He lowered his head slightly, and she, almost without thinking, tilted hers up. He stopped, his forehead resting gently, barely, against hers, a near touch, skin to skin. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the rain on his coat. She closed her eyes, and for the first time that day, her shoulders relaxed. "Mara," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin, "may I hug you?" Permission. He was asking for permission. Her voice was thick. Yes. His arms came around her, one hand spreading wide and firm against her back, the other settling on her waist. He pulled her in. It wasn't a tentative embrace. It was solid, grounding. She wasn't being held. She was being shielded. She pressed her face into the damp, fine wool of his suit jacket and gripped his arms, her fingers digging in. It lasted only a few seconds, a brief, powerful anchor in the chaos. And then he let her go, stepping back. "Good night, Mara." The next morning, she walked into the diner to find a new notice tacked to the employee board. Effective immediately, any server who wishes to be considered for the double-rate holiday bonus shift must maintain their assigned sections, no exceptions. Brett was behind the counter, smirking. "Morning. Kincaid, you're in Section 1 today. The counter. All 12 stools." It was the lowest tipping section in the diner. An hour later, Franco Sforza walked in. He looked at the counter, saw Mara polishing glasses, and began to walk toward it. "Mr. Sforza," Brett called out, his voice oily. "Your usual section. Table 12 is wide open. I'll send a girl right over." Franco stopped. He looked at Brett, then at Mara. She stood stock still, her hand on a coffee cup. Her colleagues were watching. This was it, the line. Mara put down the polishing cloth. She grabbed a menu and a glass of water. She walked straight past Brett, right up to Franco. "Mr. Sforza," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the quiet diner. "Your table is wherever you'd like it to be, but I'm only serving the counter today." She walked back to her station, her back rigid. A beat of silence. Then, Franco Sforza, the most powerful man in Lakefield, smiled. It was not a full smile, but it was a definite, sharp, genuine curving of his lips. He walked to the counter and took the stool at the far end. "Then the counter it is. Coffee, black." The diner staff stared. Brett's face turned the color of raw beef. Franco waited until the mid-morning lull, when her section was empty. "This is a problem," he said quietly, stirring his 5th cup of coffee. "It's my problem, Mr. Sforza. When Helix is involved, it becomes my problem. He's using you to get to me. And they are watching you. They see you as a vulnerability, a target." He looked her directly in the eye. "There is a logical solution. We give them something else to see." "What?" "We pretend to be in a relationship, a public one. It makes you an extension of me, not a target. It moves you from vulnerability to protected asset. Helix won't touch you if they think you are mine. Mara absorbed this. It was cold. It was strategic. It was a business proposal, and it was, in its own way, thoughtful. She looked at his hands, strong and clean, resting on the counter. She thought of the hug in the rain, the feel of his forehead against hers. "No," she said, "get—" His eyes flickered, surprised. "It would ensure your safety. And Theo's." "I'm sure it would," she said, meeting his gaze. "But I won't pretend." The silence that fell between them was profound, heavy as a dropped weight. She had just refused the protection of the Armitage Consortium. Franco studied her face for a long time, his expression unreadable. He seemed to be reassessing, calculating. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Then we won't pretend," he said, his voice final. He pushed his coffee cup forward. "But I will continue to sit at every one of your worst tables. Mara." He left. Mara finished her shift, her mind reeling. She felt both terrified and, for the first time, powerful. That night, as she was tucking Theo into bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. There were no words, just a picture. It was a close-up of a child's portable nebulizer, the same model as Theo's. A moment later, a second text came through. "Change your shift, or the wheezing stops for good." Her blood ran cold. This wasn't about her. This wasn't about sections or tips. They were threatening her son. She looked at Theo's sleeping face, his small chest rising and falling. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. She found the cream-colored business card. It had no number. But she remembered the number from the side of the black sedan, the one for the Armitage Consortium's main dispatch. She dialed. That night, the threat materialized not as a person, but as an acrid smell. Mara was on her final double shift, forced to bring Theo. The babysitter had canceled, and Brett, with feigned sympathy, had told her she could either work with her kids sleeping in the back office or not work at all. Theo was asleep on a cot made of stacked aprons, his small form curled up under the hum of the vending machine. It was 3 a.m. The diner was empty save for Mara. She was wiping down the counter when the smell hit her. Not grease, but plastic, burning plastic. She ran to the back. Smoke, thick and black, was pouring from the alley, rolling under the gap in the back door. The dumpsters. Panic, hotter and faster than any fire, seized her. Theo. She scooped her sleeping son from the cot. He woke with a confused, sleepy cry. She didn't bother with his shoes or coat, just burst through the swinging kitchen doors and headed for the front. The smoke was following, filling the diner with a dark, choking haze. She hit the front door's crash bar and stumbled out into the cold night air, just as the first licks of flame began to climb the back wall. She stood on the pavement, clutching Theo, her lungs heaving. A car door slammed. Noah Red ran past her, grabbing a fire extinguisher from the wall beside the door and plunging back into the kitchen. Then Franco was there. He wasn't in the car. He'd been standing across the street, watching. He moved to her, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't ask questions. He just stripped off his heavy wool overcoat and wrapped it around Theo, cocooning him. Theo, terrified and inhaling the cold, smoky air, began to cough. It was a small sound at first, then a dry, rasping wheeze. "No, no, no," Mara whispered, her body trembling violently. Franco looked at her, his eyes sharp, his nebulizer. "In my bag, inside." Franco didn't hesitate. He turned to Noah, who had emerged, having beaten back the worst of the flames. "Get her bag, now." Noah disappeared back into the smoke. Franco took Theo from her arms. He held the boy against his chest, walking him away from the smoke, his hand rubbing Theo's back. "It's all right, son. We're just getting some air." Noah returned, coughing, and handed Mara's purse to Franco. Franco ripped it open, found the portable battery-powered nebulizer, and skillfully assembled the mask and chamber. He pressed the mask to Theo's small face, and the small hiss of the medicated mist joined the sound of distant, approaching sirens. Franco held Theo, rocking him gently, until the wheezing subsided, until the boy's panicked breaths evened out. The flashing red and blue lights washed over them, but Franco didn't look up from the child's face. By the time the fire trucks left, Mara was shaking so hard she couldn't stand. The diner was a smoky, water-damaged mess. "You're not going back to your apartment," Franco said. It was not a request. He led them to the Duischer. They drove, not to her tenement, but to a sleek, modern high-rise downtown, an Armitage building. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling apartment, its windows dark, overlooking the entire city. "It's a safe house," Franco said, his voice echoing in the quiet. "Fireproof doors, reinforced windows. No one knows this unit exists." Theo, exhausted, had fallen asleep in the car. Franco carried him to a bedroom, tucked him into a clean, soft bed, and placed the nebulizer on the nightstand. Mara just stood in the middle of the living room, shivering in her smoke-stained uniform. Franco returned. He didn't touch her. He just kept his voice low and calm. "There is a shower. There are clean clothes in the closet, various sizes. It's new. Help yourself." Went to the thermostat. "Are you warm enough?" She nodded, though she was still shaking. He went to the complex light panel. "Do you want the lights on bright or low, yellow light or white?" "Low," she whispered. "Yellow." He adjusted them. He was giving her small things to control, to bring her back from the shock. Door open or closed, for Theo. "Open, just a crack." He did it. He poured her a glass of water, his hand steady. "Sleep. Mara, Noah is on the main floor. You are safe." He moved toward a second bedroom, but Mara's voice stopped him. "Why?" He turned. "They threatened my son. You knew. You were waiting. He said, I didn't anticipate fire." She watched him, this man of shadows and steel. He had saved her son's life. He had been there when no one else was. After she was sure Theo was sound asleep, she showered. She found a soft t-shirt and sweatpants. She found Franco standing on the balcony, the door open. A cold, misty rain falling over the sleeping city lights. He was in his shirt sleeves, staring down. She walked out and stood beside him. The air was cold, but it was clean. "Thank you," she said. He turned to her. "He's a good kid." She looked at his face, the hard lines softened by the city glow. He was a storm, yes, but he was also the anchor, on impulse, driven by a desperate need for the safety she'd felt in his arms. She reached out and took his hand. He looked down at her small hand in his, then back up at her face. She took a step closer, raised herself on her toes, and pulled him down toward her. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of strategy or pretense. It was a kiss of raw, desperate gratitude. It was all the fear of the night, all the loneliness of the past 3 years, pouring out of her. At first, he was still surprised. Then his hand came up, not to her face, but to her back, spreading wide between her shoulder blades, supporting her, holding her steady. He responded, his lips firm but gentle. It was a deep, slow kiss, a transfer of strength. Her breath quickened, her fingers clutching his shirt. He deepened the kiss, taking charge, but it was a kiss of protection, not possession. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him, shielding her from the cold mist. Her arms slid up, winding around his neck, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in the world. She pulled back just enough to breathe, her forehead resting against his. "I feel safe," she whispered, the words trembling. A small cough echoed from the bedroom. Theo turning in his sleep. They both froze, the spell broken but not shattered. Franco didn't let her go, but his posture relaxed. He smiled, a small, tired smile. He leaned in and touched his forehead to hers, a mirror of their first near touch in the rain. "Sleep. Mara," he said, his voice rough. "We will be stronger tomorrow." The next morning, Brett Malloy called her, his voice slick with false concern. He met her at a coffee shop near the burned-out diner. A tragedy. He said, "Just awful. Look, the insurance guys are all over this. I need you to sign this. Just a formality. A statement that the diner isn't responsible for, anything that might have been in the building. Personal effects." She read the paper. It was a liability waiver. It released the diner from any responsibility for the fire, the smoke, the lack of safety protocols. "No, Brett," she said, sliding the paper back to him. She stood up and walked out. 2 hours later, June Atwell found her at a park, watching Theo play on the swings. June didn't say hello. She just handed Mara a manila envelope. Inside were satellite photos, time-stamped. One showed Sable Knox's car parked outside an empty Armitage warehouse an hour before the diner fire. The second showed the same car at the diner's alley. "It's a frame-up," June said. "Helix starts the fire, plants evidence linking the accelerant to an Armitage property. They paint you as a scorned woman, a plant for Franco, who set the fire to silence you. It's a B-movie plot, but it'll stick." Franco met her at the park. Mara showed him the photos. He stared at them, his jaw tightening. He made a call. Cancel the cleanup crew. Nothing gets touched. The narrative just changed. He hung up and looked at Mara. "They want to make you a target. Fine. We'll make you a fortress." The next morning, Franco Sforza met Mara and Theo outside the safe house. He was in his gray suit. He took Theo's small hand in his. He offered his other hand to Mara. She took it. They walked the 4 blocks to Riverside Elementary, together. By the time they reached the gates, the local news vans were there, a frenzy of cameras and microphones. Helix, it seemed, had tipped them off, expecting a different scene. They swarmed. "Mr. Sforza, is this the woman from the diner? Are you in a relationship?" Franco stopped. He shielded Mara with his body and lifted Theo slightly. He looked directly into the nearest camera. "My name is Franco Sforza," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying over the clicks. "This is Mara Kincaid and her son, Theo. They are residents of this city, and the Helix crew tried to murder them last night." The gasps were audible. "They are not targets," Franco continued, his grip tightening on Mara's hand. "They are under my protection. This is who Lakefield needs to protect." The story exploded, but by noon, Helix had countered. Fake text messages, supposedly from Mara to Franco, flooded social media. "Use the kid. It makes us look sympathetic. The fire is a great cover." The narrative twisted instantly. Franco Sforza wasn't a protector. He was a monster, using a child as a human shield. The parent-teacher chat groups lit up with fear and accusation. By the time Mara returned to pick Theo up, the same news crews were there, their questions now hostile. "Miss Kincaid, did you ask him to use your son? Did you know about the fire?" Mara looked at the cameras, at the angry, frightened faces of the other parents. Her legs felt weak. Franco stood beside her, a silent, grim statue. She let go of his hand. She took a step forward, alone, toward the microphones. Her voice was quiet, but it was raw, and it cut through the noise. "My name is Mara Kincaid," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "I am a single mother, and I am a waitress. Last night, my son was asleep in my diner because I couldn't afford a sitter, and men from Helix set that diner on fire, trapping us." She pointed at Franco, who watched her, his expression unreadable. "That man," she said, her voice breaking, "ran to us. He put my son in his own coat. He administered my son's medicine while smoke was still in the air. He didn't use my son. He saved him." She took a deep breath. "He saved us." Mara's speech at the school gate bought them breathing room, but Franco Sforza did not waste it on defense. His focus was already on the offense. While the city buzzed with the story, Noah Red was pulling pavement. The vehicle used in the arson had been a stolen sedan, found completely burned out 2 miles away. But Noah hadn't focused on the car. He'd focused on the street cameras leading away from the diner fire. He found it, a grainy shot of Sable Knox, his distinct limp unmistakable, getting into a different car at a gas station 5 blocks from the diner, minutes after the fire was set. Noah traced that second car to a long-term rental garage in the industrial district. The garage was empty, but the tenant's lease agreement was paid from a digital wallet. Noah's technical team dug. The wallet was labeled HX Grid. It was a river of cryptocurrency, and one of its streams flowed directly into a holding account, an account that, after 3 hours of meticulous tracing, was linked to a name they all knew, Brett Malloy. The next move came from June Atwell. She met Mara at the high-rise safe house, the city lights gleaming far below. Sable is the muscle, but Brett is the nerve, June said, placing a small, button-sized audio recorder on the marble counter. He's the weak link. The diner is closed indefinitely. His cash flow from Helix is cut, and he's panicking. I need him to connect himself to the fire. Out loud. Mara looked at the tiny device. He'll be there. He's trying to salvage the liquor stock before the insurance assessors lock him out. She found Brett in the dark, smoky kitchen, the stench of wet ash hanging in the air. He was angrily throwing unbroken bottles of whiskey into a milk crate. "You," he spat, wiping sweat from his face. "You did this. You ruined me." "I didn't set the fire." "Brett." Mara's voice was cold, steady. She kept her hand in her pocket, her thumb on the recorder. "You sold my shifts to Helix. You let them threaten me. Did you sell them the keys, too?" Brett laughed, a high-pitched, ugly sound. "You brought this all down, Sforza. The feds. All of it. You think you're better than me. That money Sable Knox was paying you. Was it worth it, Brett? Was it worth my son's life?" He froze, his hand halfway to a bottle. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The HX Grid payments," Mara said, using the name Noah had given her. The color drained from Brett's face. He lunged, knocking the crate over. Bottles shattered on the floor. That was for maintenance. For protection, the damned air conditioner needed repairs. He grabbed the front of her shirt, his voice a desperate, spittle-flecked screech. "You're a dead woman, Kincaid. You and your wheezing little rat. I'll tell them where you are." Mara shoved him back, hard. He stumbled over the broken glass. "It's over," she said, and walked out, her hand closing around the recorder. When Mara played the audio for Franco, his face remained impassive, but his eyes were like cold iron. He didn't dispatch Noah to deliver a beating. The old Armitage would have made Brett disappear into the Lakefield harbor. Franco Sforza changed the rules of the game. He made one phone call. He sent the entire, neatly compiled file Mara's original wage theft complaints, the crypto logs, the high-definition satellite photos from June, and the crystal-clear audio of Brett's confession and threat to the Ashfield City Inspector's office, a department he had quietly seeded with his own legitimate people. It was not a violent reprisal. It was a bureaucratic execution. The Quincy Harbor Diner was not just temporarily closed, it was condemned. The city cited massive labor violations, criminal conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. Brett Malloy's assets were frozen. Helix was furious. They had lost their foothold, their informant and their public scapegoat. Their response was clumsy, born of rage. A dark sedan with Helix plates was spotted parked across from the high-rise, remaining in the same spot for over 3 hours. A blatant, foolish surveillance. "They've made this location," Franco said that evening. He was calm, but his energy was coiled. "They're desperate. We move." He didn't take them to another glass tower. He drove them across the city to a quiet, tree-lined street in the University District. The car pulled up to the Whitmore Art Center. It was an old, beautiful brick building, covered in ivy. Mara had passed it 100 times, always dreaming of taking a class. It was one of Armitage's flagship community projects. Inside, the air smelled of turpentine, linseed oil and old wood. Canvases, both finished and in progress, lined the halls. It was a sanctuary. "They won't look for you here," Franco said, watching her face as she stared at a large, abstract painting. "They see art as a weakness. They won't understand it as a fortress." Theo was immediately welcomed by an instructor into a children's painting class, smearing bright blue paint onto a canvas with delight. While Theo painted, Mara explored. She felt a lifetime of tension ease from her shoulders. She found the main storage closet, expecting to find easels and clay. Instead, she found crates. She read the manifests, imported Belgian linens. She opened the crate. It was full of new laptops for the community tech lab, Venetian oil pigments. Inside were stacks of medical textbooks for the scholarship students. She finally understood. This was Franco's blue ledger. He wasn't just funding the center, he was washing his money. He was taking the gray profits from his port operations and laundering them, not through shell companies, but through education, medicine, and art. He was turning the city's dark money into its bright future. The peace lasted for 2 days. Then Noah appeared, his face grim. "Intel from the docks. Boss, Helix is planning a public move this weekend, the Lakeshore Fair." Mara's blood ran cold. She gripped the edge of a table. The Ferris wheel. Theo. He talks about the Ferris wheel all week. We were supposed to go. "They know," Franco said, his voice quiet and deadly. "It's a trap. They know you'll want to take him. They expect me to be there, playing the public bodyguard. They want to draw me into a crowd, create chaos, and make me look like the source of it." "So you can't go," Mara said. We don't go." "I will not be their target," Franco agreed. "But I will be there. We will all be there. We will not be hunted. We will be the ones waiting." He made a call. An hour later, June Atwell met them in the art studio. "This is off the books. Franco," she said, her arms crossed, "I have no official standing. My bosses are screaming about the diner shutdown. But if Helix is planning to start a riot at a public fair, I'm not FIB. I'm just a citizen trying to save people. I'll have 2 agents with me. That's all I can promise." The final blow came the next day. A package arrived, forwarded from her old tenement building. The postman had been holding it. Mara opened it in the quiet studio. Inside, nestled in black tissue paper, was a small, child-sized gas mask. A white card fell out. On it, 2 words. "Need this soon." It was a declaration. They were going to finish the job the fire started. She was staring at the mask, her body rigid with a cold, terrifying rage. When Franco found her, he looked at the mask, then at her. He didn't comfort her. He didn't promise revenge. He led her to a back office and unrolled a large, laminated blueprint of the Lakeshore Fairgrounds. "They are predictable," he said, tapping the main gate. "They will create a diversion here, at the Midway Games, to draw security. Then they will hit their target here, at the Ferris wheel, and use the panicked crowd to cover their escape." Mara stared at the map. She saw the routes. She saw the choke points. She saw it all through the eyes of a waitress who had navigated crowded, chaotic spaces for years. "No," she said, "that's their plan. It's not what's going to happen." She picked up a red grease pencil. "They're fighters. They're not servers. They don't see the back routes. They're forgetting the entire service corridor that runs behind the food stalls. The delivery trucks use it. It bypasses the Midway completely and exits here, behind the boat rental docks." Franco looked at the confident red line she drew. He had seen the map for hours, analyzing it as a battlefield. She had seen it in seconds and analyzed it as a workflow. He stepped back, a new, profound respect in his eyes. He picked up a black pencil and placed it firmly in her hand, closing her fingers around it. "Show me," Franco said, his voice low. "You draw a better escape route than I do." The fair was a riot of noise and neon, the air thick with the sticky, sweet smell of spun sugar and the salty tang of popcorn. Franco moved with a purpose, his hand resting lightly on the small of Mara's back, while Theo rode on his shoulders, his small fingers tangled in Franco's hair, wide-eyed at the lights. They were a strange, temporary family, flanked by Noah, who drifted like a shadow 20 feet to their left, and June's 2 quiet agents, who looked like any other tourists. The plan was for Helix to show their hand. They didn't have to wait long. It started. Just as Mara had predicted, not with a bang but with a shout, a fake fight erupted near the ring toss game. Two large men, clearly Helix, began shoving each other, knocking over a tray of prizes. A whistle blew. The fair's meager security, 3 men in yellow shirts, jogged toward the commotion. The moment their backs were turned, the second diversion hit. A thick, oily smoke began to pour from the stuffed animal prize booth, the one closest to the main promenade. "Fire!" a man shouted. The crowd's playful murmur turned into a sharp, collective gasp. People began to move away from the smoke, creating the very panic Helix wanted. In Franco's ear, Noah's voice was clipped. "Urgent, the diversions are set, security is pulled, and I have eyes on Sable Knox. He's bypassed the games. He's moving fast, directly toward the Ferris wheel. He's going for the weak point." Theo. The wheel was their stated destination. Franco didn't look at the smoke. He didn't look at the fight. He looked at Mara, his eyes dark. He spoke into his cuff. "June, they're on the wheel. Cut the north quadrant. Give me 30 seconds. Now." A heartbeat later, the world vanished. The neon lights snapped off. The carnival music died with a low, winding groan. The entire northern half of the fair plunged into a disorienting darkness, lit only by a few emergency exit signs. The crowd's gasp turned to a rumble of fear. Franco was already moving, in one smooth motion. He swung Theo from his shoulders and settled the boy securely on his back, piggyback style. "Mara," he said, his voice a low command in the dark. "Count to 10. Hold on to my coat. Do not let go, no matter what." He didn't wait for an answer. He plunged directly toward the smoke, using the chaos as his cover. Mara gripped the back of his suit jacket, her knuckles white, her eyes on the small shape of her son clinging to Franco's back. He moved with a powerful, steady rhythm, not a panicked sprint. She could feel the controlled energy in his muscles. His long strides were perfectly even, and she realized, with a strange jolt, his pace was set to absorb the shock, to keep Theo from being jostled. The rhythm of his run was a perfect match for the terrified, rabbit-fast heartbeat she could feel thumping from Theo's chest into his back. They burst through the edge of the smoke cloud. A single red emergency light illuminated the path. A figure blocked it. Sable Knox. He hadn't expected them to run toward him. He was holding a glinting 8-inch blade. He saw them. His eyes widened, and he lunged, not at the man, but at the woman he saw as the source of his crew's problems. Mara saw the blade arc toward her, but she wasn't seeing the knife. She was seeing the map. "No!" she screamed, not in fear, but in command. She yanked Franco's jacket with all her strength, pulling him hard to the left, away from the path. "This way. It's here." She pulled him toward a blank stretch of wall, painted with a garish cartoon of a clown. Franco, trusting her yell, shifted his momentum instantly. It wasn't a wall. It was a heavy, steel administrative door, and Noah Red was holding it open. They fell through the doorway into a narrow, dark corridor. Noah slammed the door behind them, the heavy thud of the bolt shooting home echoing like a gunshot. A second later, Sable's body slammed against the other side, his roar of fury muffled by solid steel. They were safe. They were in a concrete storage room, the air cold and smelling of bleach. Mara sagged against the wall, her legs finally giving out, her entire body shaking in violent, uncontrollable tremors. Theo started to cry, a high, terrified wail. Franco gently set Theo down, his hand resting on the boy's head. "You're okay, Theo. You're safe." He turned to Mara. She was sliding down the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. He didn't pull her up. He didn't wrap her in a hug. He crouched in front of her, bringing himself to her level. He placed both his hands on her cheeks, cupping her face, forcing her to look at him. His hands were warm and steady. "Mara, breathe," he commanded, his voice soft but absolute. "Look at me. Breathe with me. In." He took an exaggeratedly slow breath. She tried, her inhale shattering. Again, in. He watched her eyes. "Good. Now out. Slow." He guided her, leading her breathing, his thumbs stroking the damp skin of her cheekbones. He didn't stop until the violent shudders subsided, until her gasps evened out. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "You're safe," he whispered. Then, his lips brushed hers. It was not a kiss of passion or of panic. It was a light, firm press. It was a promise, a punctuation mark. "You're safe." Outside, the chaos had a new voice. Helix operatives, hidden in the crowd, were shouting, "It's Sforza. He cut the power. It's a gang hit. He's trying to kill us all." The crowd, already scared, began to surge. Then, a new voice cut through the air, amplified and steady. "This is Agent Atwell, Federal Integrity Bureau. The power outage is a safety measure. There is a contained fire at the Midway. Do not panic." June was standing on the roof of a hot dog stand, a bullhorn in her hand. "All citizens, move calmly toward the waterfront. Use the service corridors behind the food stalls. The path is clear. Move toward the boat docks." She was directing the entire panicked crowd flawlessly into the exact escape route that Mara had drawn on the map. The flashing blue and red lights of the Lakefield Public Safety Units arrived, their tires screeching. Officers poured out, guns drawn, seeing only the smoke, the dark, and the running crowd. Franco, Mara, and Theo emerged from the service corridor, blending in with the evacuees. A young LPS officer spotted Franco's expensive suit, his height. He raised his sidearm. "You, Sforza, get your hands in the air now." Before Franco could even stop, June Atwell was there. She materialized out of the smoke, her badge held high. "Stand down, officer. That man is under my supervision and is evacuating with his family." She physically stepped between the officer's gun and Franco. "He's not the threat. He's saving my people." The night ended in a quiet blur of flashing lights and wet pavement. The fire was extinguished. The crowd was gone. An LPS captain, his face streaked with soot, found June by the docks. "Agent, I've never seen anything like it," the captain said. "That back route you gave us, it was a miracle. We had 15 people, mostly kids, trapped in the smoke by the arcade. That corridor was the only way out. Whoever drew that evacuation plan saved their lives." Franco stood a few feet away, the water reflecting the emergency lights. Theo was fast asleep, his head resting heavily on Franco's shoulder, his small body finally limp. Mara watched the captain walk away, her hands shoved deep in her pockets. Franco looked at her, his expression something she had never seen before, a mixture of awe and a deep, quiet pride. "You just saved the whole fare, Mara." She looked at the lights on the dark water, thinking of the red lines she'd drawn in the art studio. "No," she whispered, her voice tired but firm. "I just drew the right exit." The adrenaline of the fare faded, leaving behind the cold, metallic taste of fear. They were back in the quiet sanctuary of the Whitmore Art Center. The city lights below them, a silent, indifferent audience. Theo was asleep, his small hand clutching a cheap plastic prize from the fair. Mara stood at the window, watching the rain begin to fall again. She felt Franco's presence before she saw him, a solid warmth at her back. "You're a storm, Franco," she said, her voice quiet, her reflection staring back at her from the dark glass. "You crashed into my life, and everything was torn apart. The diner, my job, my safety." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "If you are the storm, what does that make me in all of this?" He looked at her, his expression unguarded for the first time. The calculated stillness was gone, replaced by a deep, weary honesty. "You're home, Mara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The storm doesn't just destroy. It looks for a place to stop, a place to dissolve. You're the place it wants to end." He stepped closer, but didn't touch her. "When I was younger, I thought I could have both worlds. I was reckless. I fell in love with a woman, a civilian. She taught art history at the university." He looked away, his jaw tightening at the memory. My brother was still alive. His way was loud. A rival faction targeted my car. She was walking to meet me. She wasn't hurt, But she saw the explosion. She saw the gunfire. She saw what I was. He paused. She left the next day. She said my world was a shadow, and it would eventually eat any light it touched. She was right. He met Mara's gaze again, his eyes raw. When I took over, I swore I would never do that again. I would never pull someone into my shadow. I would only use my power to be a shield, to stand between the world I inherited and the people, like you, who deserve the light. Mara shook her head, a slow, determined motion. I'm not her, Franco. I'm not some delicate thing that needs to be shielded. I've been fighting my own battles my whole life, long before you walked into that diner. She stepped toward him, closing the distance, her hands clenched at her sides. I don't need a prince. I don't need a savior. I need a partner. And a partner doesn't just get shielded. A partner gets a vote. I need the right to say no. He stared at her, a profound, shifting realization in his eyes. He had been trying to protect the waitress, but the woman standing in front of him was an equal. Yes, he said, his voice thick. He nodded. Yes, you're right. Then we have rules, she said, her voice gaining strength. Name them. One, she said, holding up a finger. No lies, not even by omission. I am not an asset. I am a person. I will not be handled. I need the truth, even when it's ugly. Agreed, he said instantly. 2, no private surveillance on me. You protect me when I'm with you, but you don't watch me when I'm not. You don't tap my phone. You don't follow me. You have to trust me. His jaw tightened. This was the hardest. Agreed. And 3, she said, her voice unwavering. Any decision, any plan that directly involves my safety or Theo's is not made until I agree to it. My signature, my word, it's my life. Franco, I get the final say. Absolute veto, he confirmed. It's yours. The fragile truce was interrupted by June Atwell. She arrived looking tired and angry. We have a problem, June said, dropping her keys on a table. The FIB is split. My supervisors are furious about the fare. They said I went rogue. They think you, Franco, are the problem, and they don't like my solution. What are they planning? Franco asked. They're planning to use Mara as bait, officially. They're going to offer her protective custody, unofficially. They're going to leak her location to a low-level Helix informant, force a confrontation and arrest both sides. They want a clean house, and they're willing to paint Mara as a criminal accomplice to do it. Mara looked at Franco, then back at June. If they're split, they're weak. If they want to use bait, we'll give it to them. But we'll use their own fractured plan to trap Helix. June looked stunned. Mara, that's... On one condition, Mara said, looking at Franco. He nodded, remembering his promise. Theo is not involved. He stays here. He's nowhere near this. He's not a chess piece. He will be the most protected boy in this city, Franco vowed. You have my word, and your veto. That night, the tension was a living thing in the art studio. Theo was fast asleep in a small adjoining room. Mara was sitting on the hardwood floor, a sketch pad in her lap, trying to draw his face from memory. She kept getting the line of his jaw wrong. She sighed, frustrated, dropping the charcoal. She heard Franco move. He sat down on the floor, his back resting against the wall. He brought 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa, setting one beside her. He didn't sit beside her, but directly behind her, his legs flanking her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He was quiet for a long time, just breathing. His presence was a solid wall at her back. His chin, Franco said, his voice a low rumble just behind her ear. It's stronger than you're drawing it. He's stubborn, like his mother. Mara smiled. Picking up the charcoal, her hand was shaking slightly. Gently. His hand covered hers. His fingers were long and warm, his grip steady. He didn't take the pencil. He just guided her hand. Here, he whispered. He moved her hand on the paper, creating a new, firmer line and the curve of his ear. You missed this part. He guided her hand, his breath warm on her hair. Her own breathing began to slow, matching the steady, even rhythm of his They sat like that for almost an hour, in the quiet, him holding her hand, guiding her, slowly bringing the portrait of her son to life on the page. It was more intimate than any kiss, a pure, wordless transfer of trust. The peace was broken by Noah's arrival. "Brett Malloy," Noah said, his voice clipped. "He's cut a deal. He's panicked. He's preparing a set of falsified work logs and shift schedules, claiming Mara was an Armitage plant from the beginning. He's going to claim she was laundering money through the diner's tip system. He's selling the whole package to the other faction of the FIB, trying to frame her as the conspiracy's ringleader." Franco's face turned to stone. "He's trying to sell her out to save himself. Noah, find him." "No," Mara said. Franco turned, surprised. "I'll do it." She stood up, brushing charcoal from her pants. She was no longer shaking. "He was my manager. That was my diner. He threatened my son. This is my fight. I'm done hiding." She looked at Franco. "I'm using my veto on your muscle, but I need June's hardware." The next day, Mara walked back into the ruined shell of the Quincy Harbor Diner. She was wearing her old, stained apron. Brett was there, just as Noah said he would be, frantically stuffing papers into a box. A tiny camera was pinned to her apron, its lens disguised as a button. "Brett," she said. He spun around, his eyes wide and guilty. "Mara, what are you doing here? It's a crime scene." "I know what you're doing, Brett. I know about the fake logs you're selling to the FIB. Framing me." He laughed, a sharp, panicked sound. "You're damn right I am. You brought this, you and your mafia boyfriend. Those security payments I took from Helix were just to keep the lights on. To protect us, you ruined a perfectly good arrangement. An arrangement that included setting the place on fire with my son inside. That was supposed to just scare you," he shrieked, advancing on her. "I'm going to make sure they lock you up for this. I'll testify. I'll say you planned the whole thing." The back door of the kitchen slammed open. It wasn't Franco. It wasn't Noah. It was two men in suits from the Ashfield City Inspector's office, holding a warrant. "Brett Malloy," the first man said, his voice bored. "We have a warrant to seize all financial records, personal and professional, based on an anonymous tip regarding labor fraud and criminal conspiracy." As Brett stared, his mouth open, June Atwell stepped in from the front, holding her open badge. "And, Mr. Malloy," June said, tapping the small camera on Mara's apron, "we have your full confession. You're under arrest." The fall of Brett Malloy was not a quiet affair. It was a montage of precise, legal demolitions. June Atwell's clean faction of the FIB, armed with Mara's audio, descended on the diner. They didn't just find Brett's falsified books. They found the illegal, high-stakes gambling den he'd been running from the back office for years, a major cash cow for the Helix crew. Simultaneously, the Ashfield City inspectors, acting on Franco's file, condemned the building, citing a dozen non-compliance issues. The combined legal weight shattered Brett's operation. Within 24 hours, the Helix crew had lost their primary logistics hub, their laundering front, and their on-street informant. They were cut off, and they were bleeding. Desperation breeds recklessness. Helix responded not with silence, but with a grand, public gesture. They announced a port truce, a formal peace talk to settle the escalating tensions, the location pier. 19, at dusk. It was neutral ground, a vast, dead maze of shipping containers. They sent the invitation to Franco Sforza, and, in a move of pure, venomous audacity, they invited the Federal Integrity Bureau to supervise the truce, ensuring no foul play. "It's a trap," June said, her voice tight over the phone. "They sent the FIB invitation to my supervisor, the one who wants my badge. They want a federal audience. They're planning to execute Franco in front of witnesses they control, painting it as a rival hit," he started. In the main studio of the Whitmore Center, Franco stared at the blueprint of Pier 19. "I have to go," Franco said. "If I don't, they spin it. Sforza the coward refuses peace, prefers war. It gives them the moral high ground to retaliate against. Anything." "You can't go alone," Mara said, stepping up to the map. She had been studying it for an hour. And you can't just go in with muscle. They're expecting that. They're planning for it. Noah will cover the exits. June will have snipers, Franco said, his eyes tracing the main corridor. It's not enough, Mara said, her finger landing on the map. Their layout. It's wrong. It's too symmetrical. This main path is a kill box, but they've stacked the containers in a pattern. It's the same pattern I saw Sable Knox use when he stacked liquor boxes in the diner's back room. He's arrogant. He uses the same setup. She grabbed a red pencil. He thinks he's clever. He leaves a central lane, but he always leaves a server's alley, a small gap, just big enough for one person to squeeze through, to restock. He's left it right here. They won't be guarding it because they don't even see it. She looked at Franco, her eyes fierce. I'm going with you. Franco's head snapped up. No, absolutely not. That is not negotiable. Yes, it is, Mara said, her voice steady. You promised me a veto. This is my choice. You and Noah see a battlefield. I'm the only one who sees the service entrance. You need someone who can read their habits, someone who knows how to navigate their floor plan. I'm not bait. I'm your cartographer. I am going. He looked at her for a long, agonizing minute. He saw no fear, only resolve. He saw the waitress who had faced down Brett, the mother who had spoken to the news crews, the woman who had guided him through the fair. Agreed, he said, his voice rough. They were set to leave in an hour. The center was quiet. Theo, fast asleep in his room, watched over by one of Franco's most trusted men. Mara was in the hallway, lacing up a pair of dark, rubber-soled boots. Franco found her. He didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway, the low light of the hall casting a single, golden line down the side of his face, leaving the rest in shadow. She stood up, her laces tied. The silence in the hallway was heavier than the impending conflict. He reached for her, his hand settling on her waist, and pulled her toward him. He backed her against the wall, his body a solid shield. He didn't kiss her. He just looked down at her, his eyes memorizing her face. She raised her hand, not to his cheek, but placed it flat against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel the steady, slow thump under her palm. If I fall tonight, Mara, he whispered, his voice a low vibration she felt more than heard. You keep going. You take Theo, and you do not look back. Do not let this world, my world, bend you. She shook her head, her fingers tightening on the fine wool of his suit. Nothing can bend me. Franco, not this world. Not theirs. She looked up, her gaze locking with his. Because I'm choosing this. This isn't happening to me. I'm walking into it. With you. He lowered his head, and his mouth found hers. It was not a kiss of fear or of gentle comfort. It was a desperate, deep kiss, a claiming. His hand tangled in her hair, holding her fast, his other arm locked around her waist, pressing her against the wall. Her hands gripped his shoulders, her body arching into his. It was a silent, frantic exchange of strength, of fear, of a profound, unspoken promise. Their breathing was harsh, sharp, two distinct rhythms in the dark. Slowly, the desperation ebbed, replaced by a deep, aching tenderness. The kiss softened, their breathing slowed, becoming one shared breath. His hand slid from her hair to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking her skin. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. When they push you into a corner, he whispered, his own words from the business card. You'll be sitting in it, she finished. Pier 19 was a cathedral of rust and shadows. The containers were stacked 5 high, creating narrow canyons of cold, damp air. June Atwell and her 2 clean agents were already in position, hidden on a catwalk 300 yards away. Noah had moved through the shadows like a ghost, planting small, light-emitting beacons along the escape route Mara had drawn. A single, harsh spotlight clicked on, illuminating the center of the pier. Sable Knox stepped into the light. He wasn't alone. He was holding a smartphone on a gimbal, live streaming. We're live, Lakefield, his voice boomed, echoing off the steel. "We're here for peace, but as you can see, Franco Sforza is late. Maybe he prefers to send his men to burn diners." "Now," Franco said. He stepped out of the shadows, alone. He wore no coat, just his gray suit. His hands were empty. He walked calmly into the harsh light. Sforza Sable sneered, pointing the camera at him. "Finally, where's your army?" "Come to collect your tax from the port, boss." "I'm not here to collect—" "Sable," Franco said, his voice calm and clear, carrying to the camera's microphone. He stopped 20 feet away. "I'm here to deliver." He raised his hand. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a thin file folder. "This," Franco said, "is the new art scholarship portfolio from the Whitmore Center, funded by the port's revitalization project. I thought you'd like to see what real community support looks like." It was a brilliant countermove, turning a threat into a press conference. Sable's face contorted in rage. "This wasn't the plan." Crack! The shot came from a container behind Sable, not from June. It was a Helix sniper. The bullet sparked off the concrete near Franco's feet. June's voice screamed in their earpieces. "It's a setup. They're not waiting. My supervisor's team is here. They're moving in. The shot was followed by a sharp hiss. A tear gas canister landed at Franco's feet, erupting in a cloud of white smoke. Franco Mara yelled. "Go!" he roared. "The route now." Gunfire erupted, chaotic and uncontrolled. Helix was activating their kill zone. June screamed a bullet had grazed her shoulder, a minor hit, but she was pinned. The main corridor was a death trap, but Mara was already moving. She grabbed 2 dock workers who had been caught in the crossfire. "This way with me." She ran, not for the main gate, but for the tiny, dark gap between 2 massive, red containers, the server's alley. She pulled the dock workers and June's 2 panicked, clean agent rookies through the gap. It was a tight squeeze, but it was clear. "Lock it," she yelled to Noah, who was waiting on the other side. Noah, having seen them clear, shoved a steel bar through the handles of a heavy container door, sliding it shut, sealing the kill zone behind them. Mara didn't look back. She led her small, terrified group, following the faint green glow of Noah's beacons, splitting off from the main chaos like a firework branching, disappearing into the safe, dark maze she had mapped. The escape route was clear, but the pier was not. As Mara guided her small group toward the exit, Sable Knox burst from a side container, cutting them off. He was bleeding from a cut on his arm, his eyes wild with the fury of a cornered animal. He grabbed the closest person, Mara. He yanked her back, spinning her around, and pressed the wet, sharp blade of his knife to her throat. The live stream camera was still in his other hand. He shoved it in her face, in Franco's direction. "We're back. Lakefield," he screamed. The feeds still live, his spittle hitting Mara's cheek. "Sforza, you want her. You give up the port. You leave Lakefield, or you can watch her bleed out. Live right here, right now." The tear gas was clearing. Across the yard, Franco Sforza stood, surrounded by the rogue FIB agents, their guns trained on him. He was unarmed, his hands raised. He looked at the live stream feed, his face a mask of stone. He ignored the agents. He ignored Sable. He spoke only to her, his voice amplified by the pier's acoustics, his gaze locked on the camera, on her. "You're home, Mara," he said, his voice a low, steady promise that cut through the chaos. "I'm coming." Sable laughed. "You can't even—" It happened in 3 heartbeats. 1. A heavy floodlight from a gantry crane above them snapped on. Blinding Sable, Noah Red, on the crane, had hit the emergency power. 2. A small, dark object rolled to their feet. June Atwell, clutching her bleeding shoulder, had thrown a flashbang grenade. It exploded in a deafening, disorienting blast of white light and sound. 3. Franco moved. He was not a man. He was a blur, covering the 20 feet in 3 long strides. Sable, blinded and deafened, tightened his grip, raising the knife, but Mara was no longer the waitress from the diner. Franco's voice was in her head. "Breathe, slow." As Sable's arm tensed, Mara didn't pull away. She dropped her center of gravity, sinking her weight down just as Franco had taught her during one long night at the art center. She didn't fight his strength. She redirected it. She snapped her elbow back into his ribs and simultaneously twisted her body, using her free hand to grip his wrist, turning the blade outward, away from her throat. The knife clattered harmlessly on the concrete. It was not a violent move. It was a precise, efficient escape. Sable roared in frustration, shoving her aside, and ripped a handgun from the back of his waistband. He aimed it point blank at Mara. Franco was there. He didn't try to disarm him. He didn't go for the gun. He simply stepped in front of her, his body shielding hers, just as he had shielded her from the cameras in the diner. The gunshot was deafening. Franco stumbled, a single, heavy step back, his hand flying to his chest. He looked down at the new hole in his gray suit, then back up at Sable. He was wearing a thin vest. He was bruised, his breath knocked out of him, but he was standing. He gave Sable a slow, cold, terrifyingly calm smile. "I told you, Sable," he said, his voice rough. "Every single worst table. They're mine." Before Sable could fire again, June Atwell's two agents, finally realizing who the real threat was, tackled him, cuffing him to the pier railing. It was over, but the final move was not Franco's. It was June's. As her rogue supervisor stormed onto the pier, shouting about jurisdiction, June, clutching her arm, stepped up to the live stream camera Sable had dropped. It was still running. "This is Special Agent June Atwell," she said, her voice ringing with authority. She held up her phone, playing the audio file from the diner. Brett's voice, screaming about Helix payments and the HX grid, flooded the pier. This is a recording of Brett Malloy, confessing to his conspiracy with Sable Knox. She held up another phone. "And this is the bank transfer from the HX grid to Malloy's account. This was never a gang war. It was a criminal conspiracy to commit arson and murder, targeting a single mother and her 6-year-old son." On the live stream, the comment section, which had been a torrent of anti-Sforza hate, froze. Then it reversed. The narrative didn't just shift, it shattered. The rogue FIB supervisor looked at the camera, at his own agents now holding Sable, and realized he was on the wrong side of a federal case. He quietly ordered his men to stand down. The Helix crew dissolved overnight. Sable Knox was charged. His own live stream is primary evidence. Brett Malloy was indicted, taken from his home in handcuffs. The war was over. The cleanup began. A week later, Franco Sforza sat in a boardroom. He signed the final document. The Armitage Consortium was officially transferring all gray area operations, representing millions in port revenue, into a new, public benefit corporation, the Whitmore Trust. It would be managed not by Armitage, but by a community oversight board. This was Mara's non-negotiable condition. That same day, Mara, standing at a podium in the Whitmore Art Center, announced the Lakefield Compact. "It's a new set of rules for our city," she said. Any new urban renewal project must have a permanent board seat for a single-parent representative. 5% of all profits will permanently endow the Lakefield Public School Health Fund. And 3, a public pledge. We no longer accept protection. We only accept partnership. Franco Sforza stepped up to the podium and was the first to sign his name to the compact. Months later, the Quincy Harbor Diner reopened. The neon was fixed. The vinyl was new. It was now the Quincy Co-op, a community-run restaurant and art space. Mara, now the official director of the Whitmore Arts Program, walked in, a stack of student art under her arm. The diner was busy, full of families. In the corner, at the table that used to be the worst, the one by the drafty door, Franco Sforza was sitting. The table was no longer wobbly. In the center, in a small glass, sat a single perfectly folded paper flower, a red camellia, Theo's work. He stood as she approached. He didn't look like a boss. He just looked like a man. "The coffee is better," she said, smiling. "It is," he said. He didn't reach for her. He just watched her, his eyes full of a quiet, steady warmth. "Mara, will you give me the chance to sit at every one of your worst tables? for the rest of our lives." She smiled. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a formal contract. At the top, it read, "The Partnership Agreement." Below, it listed 3 rules: 1, no lies; 2, no private surveillance; 3, absolute veto. She placed it on the table between them, along with a pen. "It's a lifetime contract, Mr. Sforza." He picked up the pen and signed his name without hesitation. She signed hers above it. Then he leaned across the table. She met him halfway, and they kissed, slow and deep amidst the quiet clatter of plates and the murmur of the community they had helped rebuild. Across the room, June Atwell lowered her phone, a small smile on her face. Her camera had framed the shot perfectly. Mara, Franco, and, running up to hug them, Theo. On the chalkboard menu behind them, the special of the day was written out. Underneath, a new slogan: "The worst table is now the best table." That night, they stood on the balcony of the Art Center, watching the lights of Lakefield glitter. Mara leaned her head against his shoulder. Franco's voice was a low vow in her ear. "When the world assigns you a corner, Mara, I will sit in that corner with you until that corner becomes a window." Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to connect with you. So please comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories and like this video. You can also show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.